I was looking at a list this week of people the world considers to be important regarding our world history. And I went through a number of lists. You can find them all on Google, of course, but I went through a number of lists. And I found people that were not surprising. I found people like Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. Now, all Americans would agree that Abraham Lincoln and George Washington are very important people. They had a significant impact on the course of the American history and the direction. People like Martin Luther King, as well, very important people, had a significant impact on the country. We would all agree with that because we live next door to them. But you know, worldwide, many people don't even know or have never heard of these people. I was thinking of Mahatma Gandhi. I spoke of him last week. Helped to lead a nation of 1 billion people to have their own nation, into freedom, into independence. And yet there are billions of people in this world that have never heard of him. And I kept looking through this list and looking through this list, and I found in all cases, in all the different lists that I looked at, right at the bottom, along the bottom, there was this little Jesus.
Richard Gilbert.
That was it. Now I thought about that for a moment. And so I had to look it up. You know that there are over 2.8 billion Christians. 2.8 billion. Those are just the people who know Jesus personally, we hope, right? But there are a lot of other people who know about Jesus in the billions. And he was listed at the bottom, right there. No surprise, though. Doesn't surprise me. But one name really surprised me that I could not find. You could find people like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, but you couldn't find Mary. Now think about it. 2.8 million Christians. How many of those people know about Mary? Every single one of them. And over the centuries, 2,000 years, how many people knew about Mary? A whole lot of people. And yet she's not even listed there. Nonetheless, she has had a very significant impact on the course of history, hasn't she? Of all of the Bible accounts that we read about the birth of Jesus, this is probably the one in Luke chapter 1. It's probably the most quoted of all. And when we read it, our focus is generally on the miraculous encounter of the angel with Mary, or we look at the wonderful announcement to Mary of Jesus' birth, or we look at the willingness of Mary to be Jesus' mother. And sometimes people look at that and they go, well, Mary just simply accepted the angel and his words and just believed, and that's all there is to it. But we, on the other hand, today, we're far more sophisticated. We're intellectually minded people. We question everything in order to be able to understand it fully. But Mary, she just had a blind faith that enabled her to just say, okay, but let me tell you, that's not exactly how it happened. We think, again, that people back then were more readily to accept the blessing of serving God. However, if you read the New Testament, it doesn't appear that way. Or that people back then were more readily to accept supernatural because that was their mindset. But that's not the way I read Mary's response. Again, we consider ourselves to be more scientific, more rational in our thinking. But this is kind of an arrogant attitude. In saying that, it's like saying people like Mary and Aristotle and Plato and all of these other people were simple-minded and have lower IQs than us. That's kind of an arrogant attitude, isn't it? See, the fact is that the opposite is the reality. You see, rationally, intellectually, and even culturally, Mary had a more difficult time understanding what the angel was saying and embracing the encounter of the angel than many of we would have today. See, Mary struggled with this supernatural encounter. and with the mission that God was, or the angel was outlining for her. The angel went to her and he said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored, the Lord is with you." And look at what it says in there. It says, Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this was. I like the word there. Wondered what kind of greeting this was. She was thinking, am I really seeing what I'm seeing? Am I really hearing what I'm hearing? Is this an angel? That's what she's thinking. Now this word wondered, it's actually a weak translation of the Greek word. Because the Greek word there is actually an accounting term. So what it's saying is she's adding all of this up. She's intentionally looking at all these actions or all these things that are happening to her. And she's saying, what exactly is going on? What am I seeing? What does this mean? So on two things you see. You see that she's deeply troubled. She's emotional, understandably so. And she's also rationally thinking it through. A person can do both at the same time. We can be both rational and we can both be at the same time quite intelligent. So you have to understand something is that we might think that they were superstitious back then. Well, no, culturally, the Jewish people had not had an encounter with a prophet of God for over 400 years. And so when this happens to Mary, she's looking at it going, what's going on? This is not something that she was expecting in any way, shape, or form. So she's very intensely emotional about this, but she's at the same time very rational in her response. It says she's deeply troubled, greatly troubled. That's what it says. How do you feel when you're greatly troubled? Let me give you this example. We used to have to take, when we were living in Paris, we used to have to take our kids all the way across the city to their school. Every morning we'd go and take them, and every evening we'd pick them up. And in the morning we'd have to take them through rush hour traffic. We'd have to take them in the subway in Paris. And I remember the first time this happened. We were walking along, we got on the train, and we're going to catch another train, and we're walking along, and a crowd of people came before us, and I couldn't see the kids. I was, you can help me with this, I was somewhat disturbed or greatly troubled. You figure it out. And how do you think I felt when I was greatly troubled? My stomach was turning. I was upset. I'm thinking everything negative. What's going on here? I'm very, very, very upset. This is the emotion that Mary is going through. She's very, very upset. Her stomach is turning. And yet she's thinking about things rationally. So that's something that we always remember about coming to God. We come to God in an emotional and an intellectual fashion. We come to God with both of those things, our emotions and our intellect. So getting back to Mary, Mary is encountered by the angel, and she doesn't go, how wonderful, how marvelous, oh, I'm so happy. That's not what's going on here. She says instead, how can this be? That's what she's saying. How can this be? How can this be? It's impossible. Let me give you a few thoughts about that. So from Mary's perspective, she's looking at it and go, how can this be? It's impossible. If you look at people who are humanistic, they would look at it and say, well, of course it's impossible. You see, they could never, ever accept the fact that if there's an incarnation, that God would be the central point of our existence. Therefore, no, that can't be. That can't be. They'd be far more comfortable if there was some sort of nebulous spirit that unobtrusively came into their lives, just reassuring them that, hey, you're okay, you're okay. But to have God, through an incarnation, to be the central point of our existence, no. And look at culturally for the Jewish people, for people like Mary. They could see the incarnation as being impossible. Why so? Well, think about it like this. God is God. We are people. God can never come down and be one of us. The only way they saw that God could come down was as a conquering God in all of his power and all of his glory, and that he would come down and set them free from the oppression and the problems that they were facing. They could never imagine Jesus. They could never imagine God Almighty coming in a helpless little baby. And Mary's in this cultural mindset. You see, only Christians could even imagine the incarnation. They and we are the only ones that could see that God Almighty could come down as a tiny, helpless little baby. The creator of the universe could come as a baby. We're the only ones that can see that. Why? Because we see it on the other side of the Bible. You get my point? We see it on the other side. We've read the Bible, we look at it and go, this makes sense, because we can't have Easter unless we have Christmas, right? We can't have the resurrection until we have the baby. And for us, it makes sense. Here's a statement I want you to think about. It is impossible for the lesser to enter the mind and the world of the greater. However, someone greater can enter the world of someone lesser. What do I mean by that? Let me give you this example. We have a dog. Anybody who comes over to our place, you know we have a dog because he's all over, right? He's barking, he's happy, he wants to be pet. And sometimes I enter into the world of my dog. I get down on the floor and we play. You ever done that with a dog? You know, you get down and you play with them and you have fun, and we're playing dog. And my wife looks and goes, well, that's normal for both of them. I can do that. I can enter into his world. But on the other hand, he cannot sit on the couch with me and talk politics and religion. It's impossible. You see, the greater can enter into the world of the lesser. But it doesn't work in the reverse. The Bible tells us in Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 8, it says this about God. He said, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. We cannot enter into his world. But he chose to come into our world. And he alone can do that because he is God. So we have Mary in this conversation with the angel. And he says, greetings, most favored one, the Lord is with you. Understand something before we continue on. Mary is most favored because she will be the mother of Jesus. She is most favored because God has chosen her for a special mission. In verse 30 we read this. The angel said to her, do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call him Jesus. And how does Mary respond to this statement of the angel? Before we go into it, let me just share this one thing. Mary is inquisitive. She has her doubts, but she's open-minded. That's a big key. She has her doubts, but she's open-minded. She's willing to listen. She's willing to learn. She's willing to take a step of faith. She has a lot of doubts. You see, if we took the passage where it says, how can this be? And we put it in the modern vernacular, it would sound something like this. Are you kidding me? Seriously? Are you crazy? What are you talking about? You get the idea? She's got a little bit of doubt here. I'm not so sure, she's saying. No, she's saying, no way, this can't happen. Again, we think that, well, why wouldn't she be able to accept this? Because they believe in the supernatural more than we do. They're so portion, we should be open to it, right? Well, let me suggest this to you. That today, we should be more open to this idea. The opposite is true. How can I say that? Well, let me put it to you this way here. I have seen it with my own eyes. Well, what do you mean? I have seen it with my own eyes. I know people personally who have been artificially inseminated in a medical facility and had a baby. I've seen it with my own eyes. Therefore, when God would come along and say, this is going to happen, I would go, well, okay. I've seen it before. I guess it can happen again. We should be far more open to this. But instead, she is bound by her culture to look at this and say, well, I can't understand how God can come into me. And then also, wrapped up in the idea of what's happening and what's going to happen to me. How is this going to affect me? How is this going to impact my life? You see, for all of us, we have, unfortunately, life-altering events that take place, right? We have problems that come our way that we don't invite into our lives and we don't even want to welcome in. Game changers, we call them. Things will never be the same again because of these things that happen to us. You know, we're experiencing maybe financial loss or loss of our health or loss of our loved ones. And we look at it and we go, this is terrible, this is painful. And Mary is going through her mind all of these things, all of the loss that she is going to experience. She will experience financial loss. If Joseph leaves her, that's it. That's her life. She won't be able to support herself. She's going to become an unwed mother in an unforgiving culture, right? She's going to be forced to beg on the streets for morsels of food while listening to the insults that people hurl at her. Her life is going to change. She's going to lose her loved one. She's going to lose the love of Joseph. He walks out of her life. All of these changes that are going to come into her life that are going to change her life forever. There's a beautiful Christmas song, maybe changes everything. Well, really, it does. Life for her is going to be completely different. It could be devastating socially for her. And yet she's still open. And she comes to this place in her life where she's willing to say and able to say this: I am the Lord's servant. May it be as you have said. And to that I added the term, let it be. You know, I'm a Beatles fan. Let it be. Whatever you said, okay. Not even thinking that anything's going to change in her life. Not even aware that God will intervene on her behalf. She knows she has to go talk to Joseph, right? She knows she has to tell Joseph this unbelievable story, and Joseph might look at her and say, you're crazy. She doesn't know that God is going to intervene. And yet she makes this statement, may it be as you have said. Let it be to me, Lord. But the angel does intervene. And that's God, isn't it? You know, God, the angel doesn't say to Mary, go talk to Joseph. Everything okay? I'm going to talk to him in a dream. I'm going to convince him. He doesn't say that. He says, no, this is the way it is. You've got to take that step in faith. And she does, but God intervenes. Now let me suggest this to you. Mary accepts by faith this role, right? She's going to be the mother of Jesus, God's Son. But she doesn't celebrate yet. She doesn't celebrate yet, does she? And that's something about Christmas. And it's something about Christianity. The celebration part of it. Jesus told us this in John chapter 15 and verse 11. He said, I have told you these so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. And he meant it. But it's kind of hard to celebrate when we're going through a rough time. And Mary's in this stage where she's said yes to God, but she's not celebrated yet. Part of our problem is that when we look at our overall cultural expectations around Christmas, it can be very difficult to want to celebrate. I was talking with one of my own family members, and they were saying, I don't want to celebrate Christmas this year. I don't even want to put up decorations because there's going to be 2 more empty seats here. And then she went on to say, I wouldn't even put up any decorations except for my daughter. And I thought, I'm glad you have your daughter with you. And they're putting up these decorations for her. But they're not ready to celebrate. Mary wasn't ready to celebrate either. We don't get the Magnificat until after, do we? We don't get this beautiful song of praise from Mary until after what? Until after she meets with Elizabeth. Sort of picture the scene. After she's talking with Joseph and they're aware of all of this and they're trying to figure out what to do, and she says, you know, Joseph, I'd like to go and visit my cousin Elizabeth. And Joseph probably looks at her and goes, oh, please go. It'll save us all of the trouble that we're going to have to go through. There'll be no questions, at least for a while anyways. Please go. And she goes to visit Elizabeth, and her attitude changes. You see, the moment Elizabeth encounters Mary, she encourages Mary. Listen to these words here from Luke chapter 1, verse 42. This is what Elizabeth says to Mary. Mary's probably blown away by this statement. You got to think about this. She's down. She's faithfully down. Is that an oxymoron? She comes to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth greets her in this fashion. She says, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you bear. But why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leapt with joy. Blessed is she who has believed that the Lord will fulfill his promises to her." You hear that? That's when Mary celebrates Christmas. That's when Mary celebrates Christmas. When she encounters Elizabeth, and Elizabeth encourages her, and then she sings of this beautiful song of praise. She is strengthened in her faith. She is strengthened in her cause and her determination to do what she has to do. You see, we celebrate Jesus coming into the world. And we do this together for good reason. We do this together to encourage each other and to be encouraged as well, too, so that we too can celebrate Jesus together. You know that beautiful hymn, "Silent Night, Holy Night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon Virgin Mary, mother and child, holy infant, there Jesus, God, so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace." And then we go on, "Silent night, holy night, Son of God." That's what it's all about. Love's pure light, radiant beams from thy holy faith with the dawn of redeeming grace. Jesus, Lord, at thy birth. Are you ready to celebrate Christmas? If not, keep coming back and encourage one another. Let's pray.